Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is your first time joining the show. Let me tell you a little bit about what it's all about. That byline down there at the bottom says it all. We are water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. Coming to you live from Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. We're just a little bit outside of Baltimore. What we try to do on this show is we talk about the same things that other people out there in the world are talking about, but what makes it unique is we try to talk about them from a uniquely Christian perspective, meaning that we always try to put Christ first in the conversation, which, needless to say, not all that common out there in the world. Now, these topics we talk about each night can be anything. They can be particularly of interest to Christians. They might be the type of things that are more secular stories that everybody's just kind of talking about, but we try to talk about them. How should we as Christians talk about them? Sometimes there's overlap. Our first story of the day is definitely of interest to Christians, and it's also things that people in the world were talking about this week. So it's gonna be a fun one to get things going. But the important thing about this program is to let you know also that you are a part of the conversation. The conversation is not just between Ben and I and Mary Kay, our lovely producer, when she chimes in. I'm allowed to say she's lovely. She's my wife. You are invited to be part of the program as well. And the way you do that is we say something, you think something. You don't have to sit there and just think it in your own mind. You can do what so many people like to do on the internet today, which is type it up and send it out there to the interwebs. But the way you do that is by putting it into the comment section on YouTube. We're live on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. Or, I'm sorry, the live chat on the YouTube, or the comment section on Facebook. We are also live on the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. If you put your comment or question or whatever it is in either one of those places, number one, you'll see it appear over there to the left of Ben's head. There's a little box over there that the comments will pop up in either forum, whether it's YouTube or Facebook, as you make them. And I also have a computer here sitting in front of me where I will be watching to see as the comments come up. If I miss something, that same lovely producer I mentioned earlier has some very intimidating signs that she holds up to make sure that I don't forget about them, to let us know how long we've been talking, to tell us when we should be shutting up. That's her job as a producer. But we will make sure we see them. And as soon as there's an opportunity in the conversation, we will fit in your comment or your question. We'll answer you. We'll respond. We can go back and forth. So please, please, please be part of the conversation. The best shows we have on here, really, the most fun ones, are the ones where we have a lot of interaction. And I mean that sincerely. Even if you don't agree with us, please put it in the comment section. The only thing we ask is, gentleness and respect. Be polite. Yeah. Be polite. Be respectful. We'll do the same. And let's chat. So that's the quick lowdown. And I'm speed talking today because we have 5 stories, thanks to Ben adding a 5th one. But because he added the 5th one, I'm going to make him introduce more of them tonight, starting with the first one. What's our first one?
All right, as Ken already alluded to, this one's kind of a fun one if you haven't already heard it. It is of particular interest to Christians, and you'll see why in just a second. But it's something that happened. It's making its round in the news circuit.
Although when I read this, I really did have a gut call. I don't know what it was. Sorry.
So you'll be let in on that joke in just a second. So what happened was there's a man by the name of Michael Packard, who's 56 years old. He's a commercial lobster diver in Massachusetts. And over the weekend, he was off of Cape Cod, off the shore in Cape Cod. And so his job is to go down to the ocean floor, collect lobsters. And he's, I guess, on a tether, and he's in scuba gear. It wasn't really clear whether he's not on a tether or not, but he's in scuba gear on the ocean floor. He's got a partner who's in a boat, monitoring his situation to keep him safe. And so this was kind of a routine fishing expedition, lobstering expedition for him, when all of a sudden he felt this bump and everything went dark and he felt movement. And he realized at that moment that he had been swallowed by a whale. No joke. He had been swallowed by a humpback whale. He said he realized he wasn't really in a lot of pain. He thought maybe it could have been a shark at first. He felt everything went dark, and then he was moving, not on his own volition, but something was carrying him in its mouth. And lo and behold, this humpback whale had swallowed him. He began to fight back. He's in full scuba gear. And then the whale started thrashing about. It eventually came up to the surface, thrashed around a bit, projected him out of its mouth, and he lay there on the surface of the ocean, just floating there, thinking, what in the world just happened? So this is And you can see why, those of you who are familiar with the story of Jonah, and if you noticed the nice little picture that Ken put in our thumbnail there. Of course, this is of interest to Christians because it reminds us of that story.
I'm disappointed about the byline, though. You didn't spell tail.
Okay, that was going to be a vote. I was going to take a poll, see if you would get people interaction to see if I should have done it differently.
Yes. You should have.
T-A-I-L.
Yeah, man swallowed by whale lives to tell the tale, and I was going to say, if you're watching, vote in the comments. Do you like the fact that it was tail, or should I have put T-A-I-L? Let us know.
I like a good pun.
But he didn't go all the way to the tail. That's the thing.
I guess, yeah.
He did not.
He was just in the mouth. So what were your thoughts here in this story?
My thoughts were what was going through his mind when he was in there. Probably something like, it might behoove me to be heaved, head out like a human comet. Anybody get?
Wow.
Those of you who are from VeggieTale era will get that joke. Love that.
Nice.
Okay, I got to say something. That song, for those who don't know, those are lyrics from In the Belly of the Whale by the Newsboys. It was on the Jonah movie soundtrack. That was actually the first song that really started getting me into contemporary Christian music.
Oh, yeah.
I was not really into it before that. And, we were watching the movie with, our daughter Sarah, because she was young at the time, so old movie. And I was like, this is actually kind of catchy. And so who sings this? Newsboys. Oh, let me see what else they sing. And needless to say, Newsboys, pretty big Christian band.
They have some pretty catchy songs.
Quite a repertoire. And so that actually got me into that. So, I mean, naturally, yes, what I was thinking about when I read the story, the first thing I was thinking of was that song. It kept running through my head. But no, I mean, there's a lot of different things to say about it, and we'll start with the uplifting part first, and that is, praise God, this guy survived, obviously, and I agree. Like they were talking to one of the experts there, says, look, this whale swallowed him by accident. The way whales eat is they kind of open their mouth, fish come in, close their mouth.
Skimmers.
Yeah, and so I'm sure he just got skimmed improperly. The whale, clearly, if the whale had wanted to swallow him. Like even he said in there, it's like, I knew very well I was at this whale's whim. There's nothing I was going to do that was going to get it out. But the whale didn't want him in its mouth, and so it did spit him out like a human comet. And but it's funny, it actually was. Did you read the story? He talked about how he spit out. He like was flying through the air and landed. How can you not think of the song when you hear this guy's story? He was spit out like a human comet. Anyway, but that was a great story. I'm glad. I mean, and miraculously, I mean, just other than just some bruises and stuff, didn't break any bones.
Yeah. Took him to the hospital and they checked him over, and nothing was wrong.
Yeah.
Other than a few bruises and everything, but it's really an amazing story, amazing tale. But
now I will say the theological lesson. Here's what bothers me a little bit about the story and the Christian response to it. And I know it's probably, tongue in cheek. We're all having fun with it, just like we're having fun with it now. But I'll give you one example. This was a tweet that was sent out by Matt Capps, the pastor of Fairview Baptist Church in Apex, North Carolina. And he tweeted the link to this story, and he just said, Jonah, quote, see, I told you guys it is possible, and look, Christian apologists, and I got to tell you, it's not one of the most common things, but I have seen over the years people objecting to Christianity, and they cite Jonah, and they say that it's completely impossible for anyone to survive inside a whale for 3 days. And, my response, I've seen a lot of people try to talk about how, well, it could be, this could have happened or that could have happened, and maybe it really is biologically possible, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, how about you're sitting here preaching a gospel of Jesus who died and was resurrected back to life.
Right.
You're preaching a God who created the entire universe, all right? Given that, is allowing someone to live in the belly of a whale for 3 days really anything?
Yeah, I mean, that's a minor thing.
It's a minor thing. And so it's like, that's the answer to that question. And when I do see people taking this story for more than just the fun story that it is, and praising God for the fact this man came out pretty unscathed, other than for sure he was terrified.
Sure.
But when they try to say this shows that Jonah was possible. First of all, read the book of Jonah. Well, first of all, big fish, not whale, but we won't go into that. That's but clearly what happened to this man does not bear any resemblance to what happened to Jonah. This man was in that whale's mouth, never swallowed, and he said never went down the throat, probably wouldn't have actually fit with all the scuba gear. It was in there for 30 seconds, not 3 days. So this is a fun story, but let's not take this and say, see, Jonah really is possible, because what that's saying is like, see, what the Bible says happened to Jonah really is naturalistically possible, and that defeats the whole point of the story. We're not supposed to just say, see, it's just a coincidence. Some whale happened as well. No, God's hand was through that entire story of what happened to Jonah, and that's the point.
No, I like the take that you have on that. That rather than trying to prove naturalistically that it is theoretically possible, which it very well may be still naturalistically possible, but regardless, I think that loses sight of the point that yes, God sent that big fish to swallow Jonah to teach him a lesson, and that's kind of the whole point of the Jonah story. But I have actually heard precisely the story of Jonah pointed to by people saying, that can't possibly be real. So I understand the temptation there for sure to kind of look at this and say, it is possible. But you raise an excellent point. And why are we splitting hairs over what's theoretically possible over a fish swallowing someone versus God creating the universe or any other miracle, the virgin birth, the crucifixion, resurrection, all of those things, And I do like how C.S. Lewis kind of puts it. I know we have a comment.
We do. We'll get to that in a second. Kelly's song, we do see your comment. We'll get to you in just a second.
Yeah. No, I like how C.S. Lewis talks about, just everyday miracles. In this one, he's referring to the virgin birth, but he says, why, everything around us, everything that's naturalistically possible is in effect a miracle because it's sustained by God. God the fact that we can grow food, it's no power of our own that causes the food to grow, the crops to grow. God still has his hand in all of that. So why wouldn't it make sense that, for example, he's using the virgin birth, that God couldn't, so to speak, hotwire the human processes? Every human birth is a miracle. Every birth is a miracle, but why wouldn't it make sense that God could hotwire the naturalistic processes and work within them?
He's the one that created it in the first place.
Exactly.
And it amazes me because you hear that all the time of people saying, how can I believe in God? He hasn't given me enough evidence, and I don't believe miracles happen because we never see them happen. And have you really sat down and examined the inner workings of the universe? Because I got news for you. You're witnessing miracles every day. The problem is because you're witnessing them every day, you take them for granted and just don't realize the miracle that you're witnessing.
Yeah.
So much that happens in the universe, the odds against it happening, frankly, naturalistically, without some kind of intelligence behind it, are so astronomical but because it's what we're used to and what we're accustomed to, we don't recognize it as being a miracle. I mean, it's kind of like if resurrections happened every day, people wouldn't think resurrections were a big deal. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Just so happens that resurrections don't happen every day. That's why we recognize the miraculous nature of the resurrection, but we don't appreciate the miracles that God is by creating and sustaining this universe all around us.
Exactly.
So Kelly's song comment here actually leads into our next story. And so what the comment actually is, thanks for these discussions. I'm disappointed about Benjamin Netanyahu, which is our second story. So what we'll do is we'll just roll into that one right now. And what I ask you to do, actually, if you're still watching us here, is share with us in the comments why. Because this is actually a question I was going to raise, and I'll introduce the story here in a second, is I'd really like to hear from people who probably, frankly, are more invested in the story than I have been. Exactly that. I've seen a lot of people expressing disappointment. People are disappointed with the outcome of what happened here. Some people who are happy with the outcome that happened here are disappointed in Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership, whatever it may be. And I know what I've seen reported in the news media, but I'd really like to hear personally, what exactly it is that found it disappointing. So for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, in Israel this week, really, for those just not going too much detail, they've had a lot of elections recently that haven't, for one reason or another, they haven't produced a viable outcome. Now, the way the prime minister in Israel, to my understanding, again, someone correct me if I'm wrong, is elected, it's similar to what they do in the UK, where you have, you don't actually elect, the people don't elect the prime minister directly like we elect the president here in the United States. You elect your legislature, basically, and then whatever the party with the most membership in the legislature kind of appoints who the prime minister is going to be. So when you're electing your legislature, in essence, you're electing your prime minister, who they're going to put forth as prime minister. And so,
don't have any text about it.
so no, so the not really
as many, yeah.
And so the the party to which Benjamin Netanyahu has belonged. He's been prime minister for 12 consecutive years, and then he was not for the 10 years before that, but he was the 4 years before that. So he's really served 16 years as prime minister all total, if you add it all up. Well, what happened is his party is still the one that's getting the most seats in their legislature. But what happened is a bunch of other smaller parties actually formed a coalition, and they worked out a deal which gave them a 1-vote majority and said that, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to all band together and we're going to agree to this individual, and I'm trying to remember the Naftali Bennett will be the prime minister. Now, Naftali Bennett is a representative of the Yamina party, and he's going to be, under their arrangement, he'll be the prime minister for 2 years, and then Yair Lapid will become the prime minister after that. And he is from, I'm trying to remember what the party he's from. It's described as more of a moderate party.
Centrist, yeah.
A centrist party, but I'm not sure what party he's actually from. So what makes this unique, I guess, is that you've seen a lot of the parties that formed this coalition to say that they are across the board on virtually tons of issues is the understatement of the universe. I mean, you've got, for example, you've got the first time one of these parties is actually described as an independent Arab party. I think it's pronounced the Ram party. You've got some parties like Yamina and another party called New Hope Party are staunch supporters of the Jewish settlement in the West Bank. Well, needless to say, the Ram party is not a supporter of that. You've got differences in the parties upon same-sex marriage and homosexual rights. You've got difference on religious freedom. You've got all sorts of differences between them. And so one of the questions that's arising right now is, okay, you clearly unified yourself around this goal of getting Benjamin Netanyahu out of office. You've succeeded in doing that. But, you've made these plans for, he's going to be prime minister for 2 years and someone else is going to be. It's like, is this coalition even going to hold up for 2 years when there's so many differences between them?
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the takeaway that I got from it. I think one of the things that this article says that these parties coalesce with little more in common than ousting Netanyahu. That's really the only common goal that they had. So really, how viable is it? Maybe, that certainly remains to be seen. Netanyahu, actually, a different article that I read, doesn't seem to, or no, actually it wasn't an article, I apologize. It was his speech, his farewell speech. It was all mostly in Hebrew, but he had one English phrase in there, and he said, "We'll be back," basically. So he doesn't hold out much hope for this new alliance to really hold up for those 2 years, let alone 4. And there's nothing really. So it has the arrangement here that Naftali will be in there for 2 years, and then Lapid will be in there for the other 2 years. But what happens after that? There's not really any kind of longer term goals here. And I think you're right. The differences are wide. I think that the gap is wide to cover. So I wonder how much good has actually been done. Now, again, and I really do hope that someone corrects us or just shares with us why they were who was it that shared with us?
Kelly Song.
Kelly, yeah, I really do hope that you would explain your disappointment, whether it was in this, if you think it's unviable, because I would tend to agree with that. However, I do understand that in support of Netanyahu, there's some disappointment in his leadership too, because part of the reason
he's being brought up on corruption charges.
Yeah, exactly. Part of the reason that there's been inconclusive results in the past.
Yeah, and to be fair,
years.
he denies it. He does, and he hasn't. So withhold judgment, whatever. I don't claim to know enough about, but I can certainly see why people are disappointed in that.
Sure, and any time that a long-standing leader is in there for 12 years, the longer you're in leadership, what's that old adage? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'm not saying that that's the case with Netanyahu, but it's a temptation, if not to corrupt, at least to become complacent. And so that's why in the U.S. we have a system where a president can only serve 2 consecutive terms, and those terms are for 4 years. There are these checks and balances here, and there is some in the Israeli parliament, but there's been talks about putting limitations in place so that a leader, just like what we do in the U.S., they can't have those consecutive terms, and someone can't be in power for 12 consecutive years. I think they're looking at more of like what the U.S. does. I understand that. I support that, actually. And yeah, like you, I'm going to reserve judgment on the corruption charges for Netanyahu, although with him not being the prime minister now, it leaves him a little bit more legally exposed.
Definitely leaves him more vulnerable.
Yeah, and so we'll see what happens with that. And I guess it remains to be seen what happens with this new coalition.
Yeah, and just looking down the road, I mean, I can see the possibility of this coalition staying together for 4 years. And here's why I can see that. Number one, because especially the party that Mr. Lapid's party has a strong incentive to keep the coalition together because they're going to want to have him become prime minister in 2 years. Now, whether or not the opposite is true, and Mr. Bennett, right, whether his party's still going to try to back out after 2 years or try to hold on to that power, I guess we'll see. Like you say, absolute power corrupts. You know, the deal could go down the wayside. That being said, what they've claimed they're going to do is, you know, well, we understand we have all these differences, and everybody who's a member of these party understands that those differences, those issues that we differ on, we're just going to have to put on hold for right now. Settlements in the West Bank. I don't know. That's some of that thing. I don't know if you can be able to put that on hold for 4 years.
Especially in light of recent events.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, but that's what they're saying. They understand they have to put things on hold for some years, and they're going to focus on some of the things they are united around, like, you know, coronavirus response, like you're saying, getting an amendment in there so to put in term limits, which I agree with you. I'm wholly in favor of. I think, you know, we've seen some other countries around the world that are theoretically democratic, but they're not because it's all rigged, and that's what happens when you elect a king, basically. Yeah. And so I can see them, you know, maybe holding together long enough for all that to happen. But here's the danger is what's going to happen 4 years from now. If Mr. Netanyahu's, and I'm blanking on the name of his party, and I'm probably going to mispronounce it. Is it Likud party? Likud, Likud?
Yeah, Likud,
if his party is still winning the most seats in their legislature, then all that's going to happen 4 years from now, this is not a recipe for long-term sustainability. Yeah. These parties, it's basically just, you take 8 votes here and 10 votes here and 5 votes here, and you pack them all together to get the number of votes you need. But eventually, at the longest, 4 years from now, you're all breaking down into your little parties again, and you're not going to have the political cachet to overcome the party that's still getting the majority of the votes, or not the majority. I don't think it's a majority, but most of the votes.
Yeah, it seems like this coalition's only chance, and I hate to phrase it this way, but their only chance for long-term sustainability is to move more towards a bipartisan system, parliament. And, that certainly, and I mean, honestly, this kind of, and not to go here, but it does kind of mirror a little bit of what we've seen in this past election. It was very much the rhetoric that we saw, at least, seemed to be and the political campaigns. There's always going to be smear campaigns in politics, but it seemed very much, especially this last one in the U.S., of we got to get him out. Yeah. And so that's really what it seems like with Netanyahu,
but
too.
But that's more, and not to say that we've seen in our countries a recipe for long-term sustainability either. I don't think it is. But it's a little easier to envision that when you really only got 2 parties in question, as opposed to this where you've got so many. Right. And they differ so much. I see no chance of them unifying for a long-term success.
Especially on issues like you bring up, like the West Bank, and right there, that's a pretty big issue in that coalition where you've got some in favor, and of course the United Arab Party is not going to be. Right. So, yeah.
So, all right. Shall we move on to story number 3?
Sure thing.
And what's story number 3?
All right. So, Tom Tatum is a father in New Jersey, a father of 4. And he sends his children to school in Randolph Township in New Jersey. And he's created this petition calling for the resignation of school board members over the removal of holiday names from the school calendar. So basically what the school board has decided is that rather than naming why they're taking off on the school calendar, like Veterans Day, Memorial Day, even Christmas, Easter, any of these kind of breaks, it's just going to say day off. They're kind of removing, and this was an effort done so that in an attempt to not offend anybody, they're just going to whitewash the entire calendar, and it's all going to be blank and kind of day off. That's it. We don't need to elaborate on that. Well, parents have been forming this petition saying, you're basically eroding the very reason that we celebrate these holidays. One of the arguments against that, for example, on Veterans Day, they would have veterans come in and speak to the classrooms and just share their stories and things like that. And so by not calling it Veterans Day, how can you celebrate something that you're not even allowed to call it what it is? And so that's kind of the argument there. And so in a nutshell, that's kind of the argument here. Now, it says none of this is being done with any input from the residents of the town, taxpayers. So another argument here is that the parents haven't had any input on this. The school board just kind of decided to do this. It wasn't like they polled anybody or anything like that. And so they haven't immediately responded to inquiries to comment on this. But they did tell us, Superintendent Fano was not involved in the board's vote. Let's see. And yeah, for example, the veto that the vote to rename Columbus Day was made after careful consideration of concerns introduced by both proponents of the change as well as those in opposition. So Columbus Day, this was kind of already a precedent that they changed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
But then they got backlash for that, so they said, okay, we're just going to throw them all out.
Yeah, that was kind of the reasoning for all of it. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and there's a reason we have a phrase, about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Look, I will say this, that I am not, I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this one maybe, but I really don't care about, keeping the name Columbus Day. I mean, the way I look at it is, I grew up in an era when people were still thinking that Columbus actually discovered America, and that's what we were honoring. He didn't. I mean, I hate to break it to you, but he didn't. Historians have now kind of looked back at that and realized, I think it was like Haiti and Dominican Republic, I think, where he landed down there. Mm-hmm. And so part of me is like, okay, Columbus, explorer, did a lot of exploring. Good on you. Had a lot of other questionable practices about his life too. So you want to say we're not going to have a day celebrating Columbus, and you still want to make it Indigenous Peoples Day because yes, there were a lot of atrocities committed against them. Like, okay, all right. Some people don't like that. They respond negatively. And so regardless of how you feel about the Columbus Day thing, though, I'm kind of like, so the answer then is let's just get rid of all of them.
All holidays.
All of them. It's like, you don't think maybe that's a little bit of overkill? Now, I'll be the first to say that a lot of the issues we talk about on the show, is this one that's going to have me out there protesting on the street corner? No. I mean, I don't see it as that huge of a deal. But if you ask me, do I see the point that these parents are making? Yes. And keep in mind, and I'm even reading this story, you know what holiday I didn't see mentioned in the story? Christmas. Easter, they're off anyway, but it wasn't mentioned. So that's not the point. Mm. I mean, that's clearly, so people that look at this and think, oh, this is another instance where those Christians just want to get their word and everything to be all Christianized.
No, but see, the other thing is, though, in Delaware or in this area, maybe not necessarily in other areas of the United States, but in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, there's a larger population of Jewish people. So a lot of schools get Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur off as well. And there's this random day in the middle of like September, October, 2 random days that you get off. And people always wonder why, because the majority maybe of the people in the school are not Jewish, so they don't necessarily, and it floats obviously, so it doesn't land on the exact same day. But they stopped calling Christmas holidays. It's now winter
break.
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't care. You have a day off for the kids. You want to say it's because of Rosh Hashanah. Say it's because of Rosh Hashanah. I don't care. Say it's because of Christmas.
Kwanzaa, Hanukkah.
I don't care.
Kwanzaa,
we all know that's
New
why
Year's.
they're getting that day off. Who you think you're kidding?
Yeah. It's not like we're forcing us to celebrate.
Yeah. It's like, look at this Thursday. We have this Thursday break in November. What? Gee, I wonder why we have that day off while everybody's eating turkey. I mean, it's like, who do you think you're kidding? But I do think that the even bigger issue than that, like that's the one, it's like, I don't care one way or another. But you're right. When it comes to things like Veterans Day, like Memorial
Well, no,
Day.
but let me ask this, because a lot of times, people do, like, elementary school kids do, they make the little pilgrim hats and things like that when we're,
For
around
Thanksgiving.
for
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Right.
And so in taking these names off, does that mean you're not allowing those things to get celebrated? Like you said with the veterans, are you not allowing them to have a Veterans Day?
Maybe, and this could be the first that you love to talk about cancel culture, Ben. I mean, we could be seeing a first step to that.
It's kind of like the aroma of cancel culture is there.
Yeah.
in this, Yeah, and so you've got days off in December. Does your school have what about like a winter concert or something? Are they allowed to?
And how far does
Like
that
Christmas
go?
songs
I mean,
or-
do you take out Black History Month?
Those aren't days off.
Those aren't days off. Yeah, this
No, but
particularly. Yeah,
I know, but
pertains to that.
where's it gonna lead?
Right. Yeah, I guess that's the bigger. That's the point that these parents are now. Again, should a call for the resignation? I think that's a little
Harsh.
heavy-handed on the parents' petition side too. So yeah, I think there's definite overstep, and we've seen in countless other stories. Just we live in a culture of overreaction,
Right.
and that's prime example here. So they got backlash from Indigenous Peoples Day, so now there's an overreaction on the other side. Now there's an overreaction from the parents to call for their resignation. That's cancel culture at work. They're wanting to both sides just wanting to cancel and and remove that. So I do, like you say, I see the point that the parents are making, especially when it comes to things like Veterans Day, Memorial Day. Those, I would say, yeah, we want to celebrate and teach. It's part of history. Students are learning history. They should learn about these things. Yeah, I kind of fall in the same line. I don't mind what you call it necessarily, although I mean, so I grew up when we didn't necessarily have Rosh Hashanah off or Yom Kippur off or anything, but there was a provision where students who were Jewish could take those days off. It was an excused absence for them. Mm-hmm. Now, when you've got a majority that are Jewish, then you just have the whole school off for the day. That's neither here nor there for me. I mean, it's call it what it is.
Right.
Yeah, like you said, who are you kidding? I do just worry where that will lead to then, because then does it get to canceling the winter programs and you can't celebrate any kind of diversity when that's what we're supposed to be about.
Right. It just seems to me, like I said, it's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's vastly overkill, and it's not even given consideration. It's like, okay, if you made a decision to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, you did so for a reason. Now, people may agree with your justification, they may disagree with it, but you did it for a reason. But when you did this next move, you didn't even look at these holidays on an individual basis. You clearly didn't. You just did the shotgun approach to all of them. And like they said, like Veterans Day, tell me what's wrong with Veterans Day. Why? Give me that justification as the son of a veteran. You're going to have a hard time, all right? Seriously, unless you can tell me why you would strike each individual one of those days and have a justification for it, then you come across as just a whiny child throwing your hands up in the air when you're throwing a temper tantrum. I'm sorry, but you do.
It's reactionary.
It's reactionary.
Yeah.
And there are purposes and there are things, and not just purposes, but there are educational opportunities in a lot of these days, and you're an educational institution.
Right.
Come on.
Yeah. And that's a good point, too. There's educational opportunities, even in calling it, call it winter break or whatever, because a lot of those holidays fall on the same days, Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, but there's an opportunity there to look at world religions and how different cultures celebrate. I just think it's overkill.
It's overkill, and I don't know. You know me, I'm one of these people. It's like give me more information, not less. I mean, we try to just silence and suppress everything because, look, we're never going to stop getting offended by everything if we shield ourselves from anything. Because I got news for you, people are always going to get offended by something. And so if they're being offended by this and you take it away, then they're just going to find something else now to get offended by. That's just the way human nature works. Rather, instead, we need to grow and learn, to be willing to expose ourselves to different ideas and not get offended by everything. Guess what? We can talk about politics and religion at the dinner table. We should be able to. So let's, instead of telling people don't talk about those subjects, how about we work on learning to talk about them in a gentle and respectful way?
Right.
So, all right.
Well
Story
said.
number, what are we up to 4 already? Look at us flying here today.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep on the educational theme here today, but we're going to move up the East Coast a little bit to Massachusetts. There's a Massachusetts public school system, the Wellesley Public Schools, that some information has come out about them. There were some documents that I'm not sure how they got out to the press, but there was a policy on responding to incidents of bias or discrimination, and slides that was from staff showing staff equity protocols training course, and these documents all had kind of a recurring theme running through them, and the recurring theme was to encourage teachers and students to report, to tattle, incidents of what they were calling bias violations when they were to witness them. What is a bias violation, Ken? You may find yourself asking. Well, first of all, Wellesley Schools has a policy that prohibits discrimination. And it says discrimination based on ancestry, race, color, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, national origin, disability, or any other state or federal protected category is not tolerated. Okay, I'm with you so far. But then they go on and they say, but we're going to define this stuff called bias conduct. And bias conduct is any biased conduct, speech, or expression that has an impact but may not involve criminal action, but demonstrates conscious or unconscious bias that targets individuals or groups that are part of a federally protected class. So if a kid says something that someone interprets as being biased against one of these classes, others are being told to report that kid, and that kid can be disciplined by up to detention, suspension, or here's another one that I particularly love, tongue-in-cheek, or other restorative responses that require them to acknowledge their responsibility and minimize its impact. So you got some kid, frankly, some staff member even, who, says something. It's more of the kid, because staff members, they're paid employees of the government, so their free speech can be limited a little more than the kids can. But we have a student who expresses something according to their free speech, and part of the punishment includes they have to acknowledge that they were wrong to say that. Now, are there categories, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, are there categories where we can see this being important? Certainly. There are insults, there's hate crimes. There are certainly things that we would want a kid to say, no, you've got to go apologize for what you just did. I don't have a problem with that per se. Some of the things in here, well, I'll read this one last example here, and then I'll let you comment on it, because I'm already tipping my hat a little bit here. Microaggressions, one of our favorite terms. Microaggressions can get you in trouble under this policy. They actually gave some examples of microaggressions
Yep.
that would be a violation of this policy. And the first one in particular is the one that bothered me the most. Somebody says, my principal is so crazy. That's a microaggression. That's not a joke. That's not you being sarcastic, apparently.
You can get detention or suspension for saying that now.
Yeah. So thoughts on this one, Ben?
There's the eyebrow rub. That's another. Some of the other examples include someone saying, "Where are you actually from?" or saying, "Oh, you got the China virus," in place of coronavirus. Those are 3 examples that they gave as microaggressions that someone can be
Where are you
penalized.
actually from?
Yeah, somebody asking somebody where they're actually from.
The implication being you're making a racist statement or something, like somebody can be from America, but have the appearance of their ancestry and things
Right.
like that.
Okay, but what if you're in a class and you're actually talking about your ancestry? Ben, where are you actually from? Where are your people from?
It all depends how somebody takes it nowadays.
Right. Well, I can't rightly say where I'm actually from, because 1/32 of me is indigenous, is from Native America. One, I think quarter of me is from Ireland.
How do you feel
yeah.
about Columbus Day? Sorry. No.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. But yeah, no, and this is an example of taking it too far. Again, just throwing
legitimate thing, concerns maybe big underneath there, but
yeah, but then just.
But you know what? I ask when people. I've had a couple people come to the food truck, and their last name is out of the ordinary. It's not Washington or Jones or Smith. You know what we consider to be some of the run-of-the-mill names that are here in America. And so I'll ask them. I'm like, where's this name from? What is the ethnic background, the nationality that goes along with it? Because I'm interested in knowing that.
Yeah.
And the thing though is that when somebody asks where my people come from, okay, I don't just say Europe. They're looking for, are you talking about Italy, Ireland, Greece, France, Spain? There are just as many equally different places in Africa.
Right.
And have different cultures. They're not all the same. Just like the European nationalities are not all, I don't know. That one bothers. I think that one bothers me more.
You got a big disadvantage when you married me, because not a lot of people realize that Coughlin is Irish, but your maiden name was Simo. Nobody looked at your maiden name and didn't know that was Italian.
Yeah, I mean,
it's actually Sicilian.
I mean, by extension, though, like,
am I getting in trouble if I say Sicily's Italy?
That's a
only by you won't get in trouble by 1/4 of my great grandparents.
But I mean, yeah. So Mary Kay, when you're asking those questions on behalf, like on the food closet, and government forms have to ask you those. So is that a microaggression? Right. That's just out of curiosity. But I mean, yeah. Again, where does it end? Follow the logical conclusion. Where does this end? And again, we come to the logical end of this is that it's not going to end unless somebody puts a stop to it. We're not going to be able to say anything.
I know this is going to seem like it's off topic, but if we keep being offended by questions that could literally just be a request for information, if we keep stifling, it's like the same thing with when I ask somebody, sometimes I'll say, well, why do you do that? It's almost like they feel like they have to defend their choice of, if I come into somebody's place of work and I'm a new employee and I'm learning the system and I say, well, why do we do that? A lot of people will look at that as this is stupid. We shouldn't be doing it this way. Why are we doing it this way? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But the question could be literally just, why are we doing it this way?
Trying to learn. Yeah.
What is important that we need, what is the logic behind doing this? Because and some people don't know. I mean, I tell my people in the food closet, don't put any food, don't use trash bags to transport food. Mm-hmm. And one of them asked me, well, why can't we do that? And I just told them honestly, usually trash bags are lined with some chemicals in order to help break down food. So why would you want to put food you want somebody to eventually eat in there to get those chemicals on it? Mm-hmm. So, but my point is that questions now have connotations just like certain words do.
Well, what you're seeing increasingly, I think, is that when we're deciding what's going to be offensive and what's not, we're looking at how it's taken by the hearer, right. And not giving any consideration to how it's intended by the speaker. Now, it's not to say that we don't say things somehow that come across and we shouldn't be educated. Oh, I didn't realize we should be listening. Oh, I didn't realize that you were going to take it that way. I apologize. That's not how I meant it. But there needs to be more of a balanced approach of both how it's intended and how it's received. And unfortunately, with this cancel culture that we're seeing nowadays, it's really only focusing on how it's received and saying that, well, if anybody's receiving it badly, well, anybody with the right, never mind, I'm not going to go there, with the particular worldview, if they're taking, because you could say things that are offensive to certain segments, Christians of the
Yeah.
population, and that's okay.
fine.
But you know, but anybody who
Because we're
is-
supposed to turn the other cheek.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're saying something that's considered offensive, well, then the remedy is it doesn't matter how you intended. We need to silence you. Or what I think you see lots of times is we just assume from the get-go that you meant it the exact way that it was taken, and you're evil.
Yeah, and there is no defense. You're when it's a mob jury, and the mob is judge, jury, and executioner. You're guilty until proven innocent, and they don't even give you the chance to prove yourself innocent. And I think that's part of the insidious part of this too, because one of the other things I don't know if you had mentioned this part of the article that anonymous. You're allowed to report people anonymously too, which is very hard to verify.
Right.
If the person wants to remain anonymous, and frankly, a lot of these examples are very hard to verify unless you've got a microphone and a camera on all of your students 24/7, or at least while they're in the building. So, just from a practical standpoint, how do you police this? And just. Yeah.
Well, and there are certain things that are covered by the policy that I think we would all agree that, you know, students shouldn't be doing, you know,
Sure.
teachers shouldn't be doing. You use a racial slur. Yeah, that should not be allowed. And so there certainly are things that are covered, but it's a matter of say, well, wait a minute, but the way you initiated this policy, you're not just covering that stuff, you're covering all this other stuff too. Plus it raises important questions about, you know, freedom of speech and what it means to truly live in a free society. And I understand, well, these are government institutions, so freedom of speech from a First Amendment perspective is implicated here. But even leaving aside the legal question, just from the moral question, you know, as far as, yeah, how much freedom, how much do we value freedom? Because as a practical matter, if you're truly going to be free, that means you've got to be willing to let people say some things and do some things that you find morally reprehensible and that you find disgusting. It doesn't mean you don't speak out against them. It doesn't mean that we don't, you know, have the marketplace of ideas to say this is why you shouldn't be doing that. So I don't think you should be doing that, but at the same time, I will defend your right to do it. And I think that's a distinction that some people lose lots of times. We've talked about the graduation speeches,
Right.
and the young lady from Texas who gave the pro-choice impromptu graduation speech. Now, I do not think she should have had the right to lie about what she was doing.
Right.
We've talked about that. But had she submitted it properly,
had it been
and gone through the
approved,
right
yeah.
channel, as much as I completely disagree with the message she was communicating, and I would love to have a conversation with her about the various different logical problems and errors in what she was thinking, I would still defend her right to say it, you know, and that's what freedom means. And I think policies like this really lose sight of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
You're only free to say what we agree with.
which is not freedom.
Yeah,
It's not freedom of speech. Yeah,
So,
agreed.
all right, we're flying today.
So wait,
oh
are
wait,
they
but wait,
just-
she's got more.
Yeah, no, I just have a quick question. So the kids are the only ones who can be reported for bias violations, or what
I
about
think
the
faculty as
I think
well.
faculty, it's a little bit unclear because it's talking about encouraging both to report, but I think faculty can as well. But it's only talking about discipline to the kids, probably because these public, these documents that went out are really geared towards, you know, what the discipline is going to be. Generally, when you're disciplining a faculty member, you're not making it public. You're not, you know, telling people, you know, and then the faculty member is going to, if you do this, you get suspended for 3 days. That kind of personnel matter is usually handled behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are some kids who would have said I was biased against certain kids because of the number of times I called on them or something like that.
Well, there is the danger in a policy like this where all it takes is one student to get upset with a teacher for a perceived injustice, like maybe I didn't get called on when I wanted to be called on, and they could say something that wasn't even true about the teacher, and then
And they can do it anonymously, and the teacher.
And yeah, if they can do it
Exactly.
anonymously, then
Then who do you believe?
You can't check. You can't even tell which class it happened in to
Yeah.
check with other students. Yeah.
and that's where I'm questioning how this is even.
Well,
feasible.
and even if the school, here's the problem, is even if the school system doesn't do anything about it, say it's anonymous, we can't prove anything. The fact of the matter is, if it happens enough and keeps happening, you know, if some students or group of students gets a vendetta and wants to keep it up, like it or not, the way human nature works is if you hear something often enough, you start to believe it's true, even if you've never been presented with one shred of evidence of it.
Right.
You know, and that's the danger. Anyway, so what's our last story?
All right, we're going to end on a study because we like to put these out here. So this one actually comes out of Lifeway Studies, I believe. And there was a poll of 1,007 Protestant pastors that was released this month and was polling, what their view was on denominations, just kind of in general. This poll was, cross-denominational. They were all Protestant denominations, but across different denominations. And over 3/4 of these pastors, 78% of pastors who belong to a denomination, said that they, quote, consider it vital for me to be a part of a denomination. 53% strongly agreed to that, and 25% somewhat agreed with that. So 78% total agreed that it is vital to be a part of a denomination. And a similar percentage, so just 1% less, 77% said their members consider their denomination to be vital. So both pastors and members, congregants, consider membership to a denomination vital. However, a majority of pastors, 63%, said they agreed with the statement that the importance of being identified with a denomination will diminish over the next 10 years. So they think it's vital to be connected to a denomination, but still a majority, 63%, say that importance is going to diminish over the next 10 years. And it leads them to the conclusion here is that pastors are concerned with what the future of denominations, and we're seeing this across denominations, Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, those are kind of the major ones. But yeah, we're seeing it cross-denominationally where the importance is kind of waning of what it means to be a part of a denomination. So the pessimism is similar to what it was in 2010 when 62% of the pastors said the importance of denominations would diminish in the next decade. So many, including pastors who predicted the demise of Protestant denominations in the U.S., have not proven prophetic, is what McConnell, this person says. The fact that younger pastors are less pessimistic could signal better days ahead for denominations, or at least a few memories of the worst days. So I guess the bright spot kind of there at the end, younger pastors ages 18 to 44 in the poll, only 54% agree with the statement about future denominations. So it is still the majority, but it's less of a majority than the 62% of other pastors who said that they're concerned about the future of denominations. So based on what we've seen, I guess, in the Lutheran Church, what are your thoughts on the future of denominations in general?
Not good. And I will say that, okay, Mary Kay, just keep quiet. I'm going to talk statistics for a minute. Okay. As far as the study itself goes, I won't say it was completely useless, but pretty close to it, because there were so many problems I felt with the way they did this. Number one, the headline just says, majority of pastors say denominations are vital. No, they didn't. Then you read the article, a majority of Protestant pastors whose churches belong to a denomination consider them vital. So you didn't include any non-denominational pastors in this survey who, guess what, probably don't think denominations are as vital. I'm going to go out on a limb here. Yep. Okay. So that was the first issue, and it actually rolls over in a couple other issues here too. But it's like that. So it's like, okay, you're not telling me anything that's particularly surprising to me. People who have already, tied their horse to that wagon, believe that they should be tied to that wagon. Duh. Yeah. Okay. That's exactly what I would have expected to have happened. Another example is that's reason for hope at the end. I don't find it to be particularly hopeful, and that for the same reason. Right. It says among pastors aged 18 to 44 in the new poll. Who are the pastors in the new poll? Pastors who belong to a denomination. All right. Only 54% agree with the statement of the pessimism about the future denominations. Okay, first of all, that still shows a majority of your pastors, younger pastors, even within a denomination, still don't think the future of the denominations is very good. But that the idea being that's a lower percentage than overall, which, okay, I get that, but you're still... the trend isn't going to be reversed, if that's what your point is of this poll, unless a majority of pastors, if you've got 10 pastors aged 18 to 44 that are in denominations and 500,241 pastors who are non-denominational, that age group, I don't care that 54% of those 10 I don't know how you get 0.4 of a pastor, but whatever. 54% of those 10 think that, there's, the future, well, maybe the future's not so bad or whatever. Maybe it's just, it doesn't, you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle here if you're talking about the direction of Christianity as a whole. Another thing I found curious about it is, these pastors, 77% of pastors say their members consider the denomination to be vital. I would expect pastors of denominations would think that, but you know how you get the truth? You ask the members and see, because members might not necessarily want to come to a Lutheran pastor or a Presbyterian pastor and say Lutheranism's useless. They're not, or Lutheran as a denomination, not as a theology.
Right.
So there's a difference there as well. You can be, and there are, for example, Lutheran churches that are non-denominational churches. They're still Lutheran in their theology.
Just not
sometimes more so than other churches that do say they're not. Sorry, pot shot there, but but you can be non-denominational. So that's just a survey. Getting back to your original question, though, is what do I think about the future denominations? I don't think it's good. Now, I do think that if you ask me, how do I feel about denominations? I think there's pros and cons. There are some certain benefits. There are certainly benefits to being part of a denomination that you don't get when you're non-denominational. Among them, number one, if you have a pastoral vacancy, and if you're part of a denomination, you have theoretically a pool of candidates that because they've already agreed to it, share at least the basic foundational theology of your church, which makes, or supposed to make, filling that role a little bit easier. Right. The other thing, another benefit I find to denominations is accountability. Now, I can give you plenty of historical examples of denominations where this hasn't really worked out, but at least in theory, the idea being is if we say this is what we believe and this is what we believe as a denomination, then when a church is trying to go off the rails, you've agreed as being part of that denomination that you're subject to discipline for doing so. Now, the denomination needs to have the guts to actually discipline you, which is another issue with a lot of denominations today.
Right.
But those two are the big advantages I see to denominations, and why we're part of a denominational church. And I've always grown up as part of a denomination, is, it's kind of trying to keep the straight and narrow as far as your theology and having a pool of pastors to pull from that theoretically share that, and church discipline. What say you?
Yeah, agree with that. I think it's important to, although not to conflate the statistics about denominations with the future of Christianity, or the future of denominations with the future of Christianity as a whole, because you're right to point out that, these are pastors who belong to a denomination. However, the future of Christianity as a whole, at least in America, is on the decline as well. So I think those two do trend in the same way. When you go outside of America, you see places in, like Ethiopia, especially overseas, it's booming Christianity, and I don't believe that necessarily a lot of those churches are denominational. So I guess I'll answer first, my thoughts on denominations. I think just like you, there are pros and cons to it. I've always grown up in a denominational church, serve in a denominational church. So obviously I think there's value to it. I think primarily for those same reasons that you gave. In theory, because
practice is always something different, but
Well, and in practice, we're seeing in denominations that it is more difficult. That even though you have those that pool to draw from when there's a vacancy, we're seeing more vacancies than there are pastors to draw from in a lot of denominations. So there's so many factors that go into this that this study kind of misses a lot of those factors. And I guess the point behind it. What is the point? I mean, I guess.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here. I mean, does it show, and this is going against my earlier position, but does it at least give us an insight in the direction of, hey, look, if even a significant portion of the pastors who are within a denomination still don't know, in other words, this reports on those that say that there is value. What about the percentage of those that say there isn't?
Yeah,
is that you're still
18% at least.
Yeah, you can still got like 18% or whatever pastors that are within a denominational framework that don't see value in it.
Right.
And if you combine that with all the pastors who now are not in a denomination, non-denominational churches, what does that say about the future for denominations?
Right. No, I'm sorry, not 18, 28%.
28%.
Yeah. Or 22, because it was 78%. 20. I can math.
You can do math.
22%. So that is actually a size. That's over a fifth of pastors who belong to denominations say that there's not much value in there. I think my guess would be, if I'm speculating, partly due to some of these holes in where theory and practice aren't matching up. As far as denominations go, maybe there's frustration with the church discipline, or what we've seen recently with other denominations. I mean, take the United Methodist Church that just split recently over certain issues. Rather than the church coming together and disciplining certain congregations, there's a synod or whatever. They come together about these issues, and what ends up happening is they split, and we form more mini denominations. And so I think there's been a history and practice of when we come to a disagreement that seems to be insurmountable, or at least, I mean, we've seen it in the Lutheran Church. We've seen it in practically every denomination. I guess maybe what we're seeing is a trend. I don't have statistics to back this up, but my immediate thought is maybe we're seeing this trend of not being willing to stick it out on the really important theological issues and really wrestle with that in Christian love, in brotherly love, and rather we just agree to go our separate ways. Now, there are certain things that are vital that we should, if we can't come to an agreement on, then we can't have fellowship with one another. But there are other things that I think we could have more fellowship on.
It's a story to tell you about that last point, and this is, I'm not going to say what the denomination was, but there was a denomination that I grew up in that I was, before I came here. Yeah, I know, but I'm not going to say, I don't know who's watching out there, and I don't, there's no need to throw anybody under the bus. But you're talking about, stick it out and hold true to certain fundamental truths. This particular denomination was going through a divisive time, like we've talked about, and the pastor of the church I belonged to at the time, along with several other pastors, decided, okay, here's what we're going to do, because we want to see it hold together. We don't want to see us divide up. So we're going to offer up a proposal at the next, if I say it was called, you'll know what denomination it was, the same regional conference, we'll call it that, okay, about something that we all should be able to affirm, just to kind of remind people, look, we still agree on this. Here's what where we can build our unity around, and then talk about the other things. And what they decided to do was the divinity of Christ. They just issued a proposal that affirmed the divinity of Christ. And the way this denomination worked is this regional conference, you're represented by your pastor and one of your ruling lay people.
Yep.
Keeping the terminology out of it. And I, for this conference, was the ruling lay person who was going forward to represent our congregation. So we get there, and this proposal has come out, and we find out that they have designated this proposal. All it is just saying we can all affirm that divinity of Christ. That's it.
Yeah.
This was a controversial issue, which implicated their whole controversial issue method of dealing with these things they have, which involves everybody to break up into small groups and discuss the pros and cons. And then each group would appoint a spokesperson to say, here's what our group talked about, and come back and talk about it in front of everybody. It was unbelievable. And so I got, my pastor and I were put up in different groups, and I was in one, and, I was still am a lawyer at the time. So I'm a talker. So they ended up appointing me to be the spokesperson, but we're sitting there, and I'm sitting across the table and having a conversation with a pastor who was ordained in this denomination, trying to convince me that we don't need to affirm the divinity of Christ.
Wow.
That was the beginning of the end for me with that denomination. I'm sorry, but it was. Because if you can't even hold true to those fundamental truths. Anyway, that's kind of a side note from this story.
Well, yeah, that's definitely one of those core issues that if we can't come to an agreement on, certainly we can't have fellowship. Exactly. Yeah. Because that's not believe. You don't believe in Christ.
At some point, I just think, and I'll get back on track here in a second, but at some point, I do think from time to time, why do some of these groups, I'm not going to say which particular ones so people can get mad at me, but let's say there are certain groups out there that I wonder, why are you so insistent on calling yourself Christian? Yeah. Because at some point your beliefs don't bear any resemblance, and there are some that really, they don't bear any resemblance to what Christianity has held to as its core beliefs for the past 2,000 years.
Right.
And so, you can have your little worldview, you can have your religion, but why do you insist on trying to fall under the Christian umbrella? And I think some of it may be cultural, because at least historically, not so much anymore, as we've talked about, but Christianity was a dominant in this in this country, and people wanted to fit under that umbrella to get the perceived social benefits of being in that. All right, but getting back to the original topic at hand, this is I wrote myself a note so I wouldn't forget this question that I wanted to raise, and this is one of those that I don't know the answer to. I'm just going to throw it out there. We're talking about denominations versus non-denominations, and with denominationalism, it certainly has those benefits. I think if it's working properly, of being able to fill pastoral vacancies of church discipline. But I would say one of the downsides of denominationalism, and you hit on this, is it does tend to make us think in segmented terms of the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. We sometimes have trouble seeing ourselves as one unified body, because how many times when someone asks you, what religion are you? Do you say Christian or do you say Lutheran? Right. And so we kind of tend to categorize ourselves in these little subcategories. So here's the question: does non-denominationalism better address that? In other words, if let's say there were no such thing as denominations, all you had were a bunch of churches, let's just say in the U.S. for right now, because that's the culture we're in, and none of them belong to a formal denomination. So they all, maybe let's say they all hold to certain core Christian principles. They're Christian churches, but on things like baptism and all this, they speaking in tongues, whatever you want to call it, those peripheral matters, they have difference of opinion, but they're all just individual congregation wide. All right. Does that type of environment make it easier to still see ourselves as one unified body of Christ, or does it do the opposite and almost make us feel like competitors in our capitalistic society? Almost, we're all competing for congregants, so that we become even more individualized, and now we're no longer the Christian church. We're Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious what your thoughts would be.
I would think, and here's the caveat, that if they were rightly holding to the core principles of Christianity, the core tenets of the faith, then yeah, it would lend itself to a better and more robust understanding of what it means to be a Christian. I mean, look, there were no denominations in the Acts 2 community. There aren't going to be any denominations in heaven. So somewhere between there and there.
Yeah, but in heaven we're going to know the answers to a lot of these questions.
Well, yeah. Case in point, in heaven, that reminds me of a joke of, I won't, never mind.
Apparently it wasn't a good joke.
Yeah, well.
Or was it a biased one?
Yeah, it was a biased one. But, so somewhere in between, the church's inception and the church's fulfillment in Christ and glorification and all of that, we've got to wade through all this messy stuff together. And I almost wonder sometimes, the question that you're proposing is, do non-denominationals in this arena get it more right, theoretically? I'm inclined to say yeah, because there shouldn't be any competition in the body of Christ. We're all, just because one part isn't a hand, shouldn't say to the foot, I don't need you, right? That's biblical terminology there. Just because Trinity is not a eye, then we shouldn't say to Good Shepherd up the road, who's a hand, that we don't need you. We can't have fellowship with you. We have different gifts and abilities as the Spirit has given us. And I think that the imagery of the body is about, Paul uses this for believers in general. But I think it should be true of churches as well. And this gets at your ecclesiology, how you view the church, what is the function of the church. And there is biblical, Paul writes to Timothy and, Titus, and, kind of lays out how the basic function of eldership and leadership in the church should work. And I think we need to hold fast to that. But on these other peripheral issues, and that's kind of, I guess, what I was saying before, is why can't we have more unity?
Well, and I guess here's my, and just the question always runs around my mind, and I wonder if it's a matter of theory versus practice, or, I can see, and I agree with everything you're saying, like this is not the future of the church, not to be broken up into denominations. We know that from Scripture. But I've also seen plenty of examples of, non-denominational churches that tend to put themselves out on an island, that they're, especially, I hate to say it, but some of the larger ones, it's kind of like, we're the big kid, you're the little kid, you need us, we don't need you, almost kind of thing. And maybe I'm overgeneralizing it, but because here's the problem. It's like, I can see in theory, it's like, okay, if we were to break down these denominational walls and just be like, look, on the peripheral matters, you church, believe what you want. Number one, you lose the discipline, which I don't know is really being implemented, frankly, in a lot of denominations today anyway, to prevent a system like that from a whole bunch of churches running off in all sorts of different directions and believing all sorts of wacky things. But I also just, we're all fallen, sinful humans. And so I wonder, it's like, well, yeah, I can see where in theory, not having these denominational boundaries could and should help us better be able to be co-workers in Christ with each other. I just wonder, I just question whether it will, or whether, given our culture, especially here in America, will we really see other churches as co-workers, or will we see them as competitors? Will we see the bigger church down the road that's got, 100 more people worshiping than we do on a weekend as, an opportunity to be a partner in the gospel, or we see them, what are they doing? How can I get some of those people over here?
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head there about being in competition with one another. I'll share, and it's anecdotal, but it kind of illustrates what you're talking about, that in practice, yeah, in theory, we should be unified, but in practice, that's not always what happens. And I'm not going to give names, but there's a...
Steve. Sorry.
Well, there's a particular, in our local community...
Is this Frank or Ernie?
Bert and Ernie.
Bert and Ernie.
Bert and Ernie.
That's not what Pastor Chuck said this Sunday. It was Frank and
Oh,
Ernie.
right.
Oh,
yeah.
Frank and Ernie.
Frank and Ernie, yeah.
Right, yes.
No, this comes from somebody else.
Okay.
But, yeah, neither Frank nor Ernie. But, yeah, there's a particular non-denominational organization in our community who was asking, and I was talking to the leader of this organization, and he was telling me how he went to another church in the community, local church, and had somebody flat out tell him, "We don't want you here." And he said, "Why?" And the person from that church said, "Because you're ministering to our people." And so and he said, "So you mean to tell me that you've got people knocking down your door every Sunday?" And the person said, "Well, no." And he said, "That's all I need to hear. Thank you very much." So we tend to see in practice, and it's unfortunately what we see more often than not, we see a competition or territorialism of churches who think, well, our theology is better than yours, so we want to get everybody in our doors. Or, or frankly, maybe this is a byproduct of focusing too much on numbers. Everybody wants to have the big church on campus, the big, church in the neighborhood, and, be the mega church or whatever. There's this drive and temptation for pastors to want that. And that leads to territorialism, and just frankly, if anything, it shows us how we're all still sinful and fallen, and we need God's grace.
If there's a blessing coming out of the pandemic, that's it. And that is that it's become very, very difficult nowadays to count numbers in your congregation, because you just don't know between, you've got the physical people, but you've got so many people online. For every view online, is that one person? Is that 5 people? You have no idea how many people are actually watching the screen. And so it's, I think, almost hopefully helped us get rid of that numbers counting mentality, because you just well, I'm not saying you can't, but it's a lot harder to get accurate numbers on what your attendance is. Yeah, so my thought process on this has always been the same thing. It's like, look, if you are watching us and you belong to a smaller church, then hey, there's mountains you can move. I mean, well, the Holy Spirit can do anything, but reach out to some other churches in your area, partner up, do some ministries together. Yeah. Don't use the fact that you don't have the volunteer base as an excuse not to do something, because even if you don't have the volunteer base at your church, what if you partnered with 3 or 4 others in your community? Then maybe you would. And if you're from a larger church that has a lot of these resources, don't be isolated to just within hey, look at all these wonderful ministries that we're doing. Reach out to some of the other churches that don't have those resources and say, hey, how can we help you? How can we partner with you? It doesn't have to be your name slapped on everything, because it's not about X church.
Right.
It's about,
then if it is, whose glory is it really for?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not your, there's a song, I don't want to leave a legacy. I don't care if they remember me. And that's the whole point. It's I don't care when I pass away, if not one single person 5 minutes after I die, maybe 6. I'd like my wife to remember me a little longer. It remembers who I am, but they remember Jesus Christ. That's a successful life.
Yeah.
That's a life well lived. And the same thing, I don't care if your church goes under, but you've, as a result of the work that you did, countless people have come to Christ. then who cares if they don't remember your church?
Right.
You know, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
So,
Amen. And that, again, ties back into Pastor Chuck's message. That's what we should be striving for. To hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant.
I didn't even do that on purpose, but that worked out pretty well. Look at that. All right. So, hey, you know, it's funny how the show works sometimes because if you look at all, I knew that we didn't have a lot of topics here that were like really, really long ones. That's why I didn't kill you for suggesting a fifth one. I wouldn't have thought that one would have been the one we talked the longest about, though. But we did. And I'm being told this is what. Oh, here we go. Now it goes. Preach it, Ken, from a very wise lady, Katie Lander says.
Oh, I agree.
So yeah, I never would have thought that would have been the one we talked longest about, but it's just amazing the way the Spirit works sometimes. It's like I think there's something there that needs to be said about, you know, how we regard each other as one body of Christ. Hey, let's bring it all together. So
Right.
We're all in this together.
Didn't you just say we didn't want
I did say it in an earlier meeting.
And suddenly he's Dave Merritt.
Well, no, it's funny because we had a meeting the other day, and it was Mark, right, who said
Yes.
he just used the phrase. He didn't sing nothing song. He just used the phrase. You know, we're all in this together. And I very kindly asked him to never use that phrase again, because you can't say that without me thinking of the song. Just like you can't have this first story for tonight about a guy getting swallowed by a whale without me thinking of the Newsboys. Yeah, I'm sleeping with fishes here in the belly of the whale. Stop! We don't want to pay royalties. So anyway, I think that's good. We can stop vamping here long enough. We've been gone. We can actually have an early dismissal here this evening, I think. And now that we know your wife is watching, we can know that she's going to be expecting you home very soon. So he still has an announcement video to do, though, Katie, and then he'll be on his way. So, all right. Anything else?
I think we're good.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Mary Kay.
Thanks, Mary Kay.
Thank you all for watching. And remember, if you're not watching us live, you can still be part of the conversation. Just put your comment or question in the YouTube comments. On the YouTube, not the Facebook one, please go over to YouTube. Put it in the comments of this episode on the YouTube channel. And we'll take a look at it between this week and next. And we will bring up whatever your questions or comments are at the top of next week's show. All right? Thank you all for watching. We will see you next week and every week, Wednesdays at 5:30. God bless.